Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram.
Will you use it later, or should I keep it here?
No, take it away. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Ram, Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Oi! Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Okay, Hare Ball. Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. 92, it goes down.
You say Krishna, then we put it.
Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, 491. Anyway, it's okay. Hare Krishna. Okay. Devotees, welcome to our... You got to turn off this speaker. One moment. Okay, so devotees, we're in chapter 10. Can't remember the name, but anyway, we're in chapter 10. Let me just have a quick look. Chapter 10 is titled, This Momentous Hour of Need. Okay, so Prabhupada has published Easy Journey to Other Planets, his first book, rather than just Back to Godhead magazines, although he is doing Back to Godhead also. But this idea of doing books has been given to him by a couple of people, and he really took it as a divine inspiration. So he's working so hard. Oh my gosh, Srila Prabhupada, what a person, what a devotee. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastyacha Deshatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatrubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada is in Delhi, in Chippiwada, at this place of Krishna Pandit, which, as we understand, just recently, not a couple of years ago or something, was acquired, the whole place, as we understand, acquired by ISKCON. So at Chippiwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami followed much the same daily schedule as at Keshi Ghat, except that with Krishna Pandit doing some of the secretarial work for Back to Godhead, he was free to devote more hours to Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is Prabhupada, yes. His focus is changing, or has changed, really. Back to Godhead's going on. He sees it as being worthwhile. It's something at least that he can get out to many people, hundreds of people every month. So it's worthwhile. but Srimad Bhagavatam is a much greater and ultimately more significant project which will have a much deeper impact on humanity and is really a much deeper aspect of Srila Prabhupada's mission. So, Krishna Pandit, he used to translate Srimad Bhagavatam before dawn, about 3 a.m. In the beginning there was no typewriter, but then he arranged a portable typewriter. He would do his daily work and then cook his food himself. I arranged raw materials for his cooking. Sometimes he used to come to my family asking my wife to get some food. Sometimes he would also bathe at 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Every day he was typing, and he himself was reading some Bhagavatam, and he was going down in the temple for darshan. Then he was going outside, sometimes returning at 2 or 4 in the afternoon. Then he was typing and sending the proofs of Back to Godhead to a place and checking them. He was doing by hand all this type of work. His main activity was typing many hours a day, unquote. Bhaktivedanta Swami worked from a Sanskrit and Bengali Bhagavatam, edited by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and a large book containing the original commentaries of 12 great acharyas. He had a standard format. He made a Roman transliteration of the Sanskrit Devanagari script, then word-for-word English synonyms, an English prose translation, and finally his English purport on that verse. Before writing his own purport, however, he would consult the commentaries of the acharyas, especially Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Vishwanath Chakravarti, Jiva Goswami, Vijay Dwaja Tirtha, and Sridhar Swami. He contemplated the size of the project he was attempting. The Bhagavatam contained 18,000 verses. The first canto's 17 chapters would fill 3 volumes of 400 pages each, and the second canto with 10 chapters would take 2 volumes. Up through the 9th canto, there would be maybe 30 volumes. The 10th canto, containing 90 chapters, would take 20 volumes. There were 12 cantos, and so the total would be at least 60 volumes. He thought he might be able to finish it in 5 to 7 years. He said, "If the Lord keeps me physically fit, then in the fulfillment of Srila Prabhupada's will, I could complete this work." In this case, of course, Srila Prabhupada means Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. He decided to introduce the first volume with a biographical sketch of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ideal preacher of the Bhagavatam. The reader could best appreciate the Bhagavatam by seeing its practical demonstration in the life of Lord Chaitanya. The special feature of Lord Chaitanya's presentation had been his desire that Srimad Bhagavatam be preached in every nook and corner of the world by everyone who happens to take his birth in India. Lord Chaitanya had called Srimad Bhagavatam the spotless Purana, and had considered the chanting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, along with the Hare Krishna mantra, to be a complete scientific process for developing pure love of God. Yes, well, Bharata Bhumate Hoila Manusya Janmaja, Janma Sarta Karikara Para Upakar, you may know that verse. It's Lord Chaitanya speaking in Caitanya Charitamrita, that everyone, Bharata Bhumi, Janmaja, everyone who's taken birth in India, should make their lives perfect and then help others to make their lives perfect or distribute Krishna consciousness. Now, fortunately, people like the two of you, you're sort of Bharata Bhumate Hoile Manusya Janma. Yeah, via South Africa. But you're taking to the preaching of Krishna consciousness. It's really good. But an important point that is being made here is that on one hand, the Yuga Dharma is Harir Nam Eva Kevalam, the chanting of the Hari Nam, the holy names of the Lord. And generally we hear in those terms, and that's the idea, that's there. But an interesting point is made that Lord Chaitanya considered the chanting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam to be part, along with the Hare Krishna mantra, to be part of a complete scientific process for developing pure love of God. Means that, of course, Hare Krishna mantra and Srimad Bhagavatam, they're just both completely transcendental sound vibrations. But still, Srimad Bhagavatam is just full of information. We can learn so much in a very obvious and clear way. Chanting of Hare Krishna, of course, we understand if we chant nicely, everything will be revealed to us. But Srimad Bhagavatam is actually directly just informing us of everything. So you put the two together, the chanting of Hare Krishna and the reading, chanting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it makes everything just very powerful and very deep process for making complete progress and achieving the perfection of Krishna consciousness, pure love of God. Working from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's commentary on Caitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat, Bhaktivedanta Swami gave a 50-page synopsis of Lord Chaitanya's life and his Sankirtan movement. He described Lord Chaitanya's divine ecstasies, his philosophical confrontations with leading scholars of the day, and his inauguration of the Sankirtan movement, the congregational chanting of the holy name. Bhaktivedanta Swami especially connected Lord Chaitanya's life and teachings to what he saw as the present crucial time in history. Help for humanity in this momentous hour of need lay in the Vedic literature, and especially in Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote from Prabhupada, "We know that the foreign invaders of India could break down some of the monumental architectural work in India, but they were unable to break up the perfect ideals of human civilization, so far kept hidden within the Sanskrit language of Vedic wisdom." Yeah. So Srila Prabhupada understood that without these two things, without the chanting of Hare Krishna, and without the knowledge of the Vedic literatures, and particularly Bhagavatam, and also particularly Bhagavad Gita, and the various other books that Prabhupada himself translated, that without these things, the situation basically was hopeless for the people. Basically hopeless. That other religious traditions couldn't help enough. They can do something. It's not that they can't do anything at all, but they cannot do enough to facilitate a person achieving the perfection of life and going back to Godhead. There's just no question of it. So Prabhupada understood that these were the only things that could help people sufficiently, without which they had no chance. And Prabhupada understood he was the only person who could do it. Because the rest of India, the other sampradayas, and what to speak of Hinduism, was just completely, hopelessly entangled in confusion, and generally confusion on the spiritual platform with Mayavad and like that, and confusion being absorbed on the material platform using the Vedic tradition just for material enjoyment. So Prabhupada saw that was what was the situation all around him. But then even amongst his own godbrothers, during the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, there had been this dynamic preaching mission based on just pure Krishna consciousness and saving the world through pure Krishna consciousness. But as we read, a week ago or thereabouts, the godbrothers, Prabhupada's godbrothers, they became hopelessly deviated, terribly deviated, more or less immediately after the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So let us continue. The Sanskrit language had protected the secret for thousands of centuries, but now the secret had to be released to the world. I remember when I joined the temple, and we'd read the books, of course, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam particularly, but there was always this idea that we can't learn Sanskrit. It's just too much. It's too much. So like this, even when the British went to India and some of them learnt Sanskrit, a handful learnt Sanskrit, but not in such ways that they could penetrate the real message of Bhagavad Gita, and particularly the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. They still remained outside, even though they knew Sanskrit, you could say, on a certain level at least. So like this, it was as if the Sanskrit language had protected the secrets of Krishna consciousness for such a long time. As he approached the first verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami became absorbed in the Bhagavatam's purpose. The verses stressed that the Bhagavatam alone could save society from the evil influences of the age of Kali. Srimad Bhagavatam's recommendation for this age was simply to hear from the pure devotees about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The setting of the Bhagavatam was a gathering of sages at Naimisharanya about 5,000 years ago, at the dawn of the present age of Kali. Foreseeing the degradation of humanity, the sages asked the senior member of the assembly, Sutta Goswami, now that Lord Krishna, the shelter of all religious principles, has returned to his spiritual abode, where are religious principles to be found? Sutta's answer was that the epic Srimad Bhagavatam, which is as brilliant as the sun, was a literary incarnation of God and would give direction to persons lost in the dense darkness of Kali Yuga. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, under the instruction of his spiritual master, Narada Muni, sat down and entered a deep meditation. In trance, he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his energies, and the suffering souls of Kali Yuga. He also saw that the remedy for their suffering was pure devotional service. With this vision and the instructions of his spiritual master as his inspiration, Vyasadeva set about to compile Srimad Bhagavatam to give the highest benefit to the suffering souls of Kali Yuga. In presenting the literary incarnation of God, Srimad Bhagavatam, for the benefit of the Western world, Bhaktivedanta Swami realized that he was performing an important task, following in the footsteps of Srila Vyasadeva. As Srila Vyasadeva had had a vision of Krishna and had received direction from his spiritual master before beginning his literary mission, Bhaktivedanta Swami had his vision and had received instructions from his spiritual master. Bhaktivedanta Swami envisioned distributing in mass the book of Srila Vyasadeva. He would not merely translate it, he would personally take it to the West, present it, and teach people in the West through the book and in person how to develop pure love of God. Srila Prabhupada. The Communist Party has become popular simply by distributing their literatures. In Calcutta, the communist agents were inviting friends and reading their literature. The Russians never came to India, but by distributing literature in every language, they got a pretty good number of followers. If it is possible for ordinary third-class mundane literature, why shouldn't transcendental literature create devotees all over the world? So yes, the communist literature, third class, not even second class, just hopeless actually. Karl Marx and others like him. There is good potency for pushing on these literatures very vigorously from village to village. The Bhagavad Dharma is the original religion of the human society. Whatever else may be passing as religion has come from the Vedic literature. People are after these books. They're hankering for them. Lord Caitanya said that in every town and village on the surface of the world, they will know the message of the Sankirtan movement. This means that in every village and town all over the world, there are many candidates who are awaiting this message. It is transcendental literature. Nobody can challenge it. It is done so nicely, without any spot, the spotless Purana, unquote. Without any spot means without any, what would you say, any blockage, any type of covering over even a little part of the message. It's all there, just brilliantly, effulgently present, without any sort of blotch, if you know what I mean. When I was young at school, we had ink pens. Did you use ink pens? Oh, you did? And sometimes, and a bottle of ink, and you'd have to load it up.
Pen with ink in it.
No. Fountain pens. Fountain pens we had to use. And sometimes, splodge. A bit of ink would come and just splodge over things. So that's what Prabhupada is saying. It's done, Srimad Bhagavatam is done so nicely without any spot, without any splodge of ink just covering anything. The spotless Purana. Bhaktivedanta Swami put his faith in Srimad Bhagavatam, giving up almost all other kinds of missionary activity. And this had been the advice and example of his spiritual master and of Lord Chaitanya. They had not been interested in building costly temples or in creating many neophyte disciples. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had stressed preaching. Preaching meant books. Wow, it's only 90, I wonder why. Preaching meant books, and the best book was Srimad Bhagavatam. To write and publish the Bhagavatam for the enlightenment of the general populace was real service to the Lord. That was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's opinion. You remember we read how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta confided, you could say, to Srila Prabhupada. Do you remember that? That when they opened the big temple in central Calcutta, and the disciples were fighting over who would get what room, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta told Srila Prabhupada that better if we sell the marble, because it is made of marble. I mean, it's still there, of course. Sell the marble and print books. That was what he said. Yes. So, what now? Anyway, okay. So he had 96, 97, just see. Unpredictable. So to write and publish the Bhagavatam for the enlightenment of the general populace was real service to the Lord. That was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's opinion. He had preferred publishing books to establishing temples, and he had specifically told his disciples to write books. It was the business of advanced, empowered devotees to write books, publish them, and distribute them widely. A program to distribute transcendental literature everywhere with even more expertise than the communists would create a great positive effect on the people of Europe and America. Well, the communists in India, that's what Prabhupada was talking about, we read a few minutes ago. They had their, whatever literature, and they were just giving it out. And in some places like West Bengal, communists, there's really a lot of people who, well, put it this way, the Communist Party is very influential. They're not actually ruling in West Bengal at the moment, but they were previously for some years. And in other places, I think in Kerala, communists are also very influential. But now you see, from the distribution of Prabhupada's books in India, the massive impact.
what a huge impact. It's amazing. Yeah. And if Europeans and Americans turned to Krishna consciousness, then the rest of the world would follow. Bhaktivedanta Swami continued working alone in his room at Chippiwada, absorbed in thoughts of spreading the news of Krishna on a scale never before attempted. He sometimes wondered how Westerners, who were so far removed from the Vedic culture could adopt it. They were meat-eaters, malechas. When one of his godbrothers had gone to England, the Marquis of Zetland, on hearing the 4 prohibitions against sinful life, had laughed scornfully. Impossible. But Srimad Bhagavatam spoke for itself. Quote, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is also the Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, does cleanse the desire for material enjoyment in the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge for hearing his, Krishna's, messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Sounds like an early version of the translation of that verse from the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam. Although he was known as an English preacher, Bhaktivedanta Swami knew there were always faults in his presentation in that foreign language, and there was no editor to correct them. But such technical faults would not keep him from printing Srimad Bhagavatam. This idea was also presented in the opening chapters of the Bhagavatam. Quote, the literature, which is full with description of transcendental glories, of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation of transcendental vocabulary, all meant for bringing about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization of the world. Such transcendental literatures, even though irregularly composed, is heard, sung, and accepted by the purified men who are thoroughly honest. So this is Prabhupada again, the early version, presented as it is. In fact, that's what is being pointed out, that Srila Prabhupada, even though he's well known for being a preacher in English language, and he was really into it. Like we read how on the day of his taking sannyas during the ceremony, Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj, who was giving him sannyas, asked him to speak. And Prabhupada, there were not a large number, but basically the temple residents were there. And Prabhupada knew that hardly any of them, maybe 2 or 3, spoke English. But still, he understood, this is my mission. So Prabhupada spoke, being invited by Keshava Maharaj, he spoke, but he spoke in English. But still, Prabhupada knew that his English at that point was a lot better than my Russian. I gave a little class today, 15 minutes. But, a foreigner speaking a language which is not their own, it's just so difficult to do it on the level of a local speaker. It's just so difficult. The amount of study and practice you'd have to do. But still, they'll always understand he's a foreigner. I was reading, actually, an article about on the subject, the difficulty of learning a foreign language to the level of the local speakers. Yeah, it's all about fluency. The article is all about fluency in what is to you a foreign language. And this one fellow was quoted. His family was from Italy, but he was born and raised in America. But at home, they spoke Italian. And then he moved for work or something. He moved to Italy. And he was living in Italy and only speaking Italian for, I forget how many years, but at least 10 years. It's just all day, every day, Italian language. And one day, he was staying in some guest house or something, living in that place. And someone telephoned the office asking to speak to him. And he was just walking nearby. And he heard the woman in the office say, "Oh, you want to speak to such and such? Oh, him, the foreigner who can't speak Italian properly." And he'd been speaking it, for like at least 30 years. He'd been speaking it. But she said, "Oh, yeah, him, the foreigner who can't speak Italian properly." It's a whole thing to learn a language. On that level. But Srila Prabhupada understood that even though his English was not, always like colloquial English, just, colloquial English, but he knew that by Krishna's mercy, it would be understandable, and particularly when he got help from, real scholarly native speakers. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote in his purport, quote, "We know that in our honest attempt for presenting this great literature, conveying transcendental message for reviving the God consciousness of the people in general, as a matter of re-spiritualization of the world atmosphere, is fraught with many difficulties. Our capacity of presenting the matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there may be so many literary discrepancies in spite of our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with our all faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of the society will still accept this on account of its being an honest attempt for glorifying the Almighty Great, so much now badly needed. When there's fire in the house, the inmates of the house go out for help from the neighbors, who may be foreigners to such inmates, and yet without any adequate language, the victims of the fire express themselves, and the neighbors understand the need, even though not expressed in adequate language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed in the matter of broadcasting this transcendental message of the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the whole polluted atmosphere of the present-day world situation. After all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and as such, we're concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there is the success. In hearing that, you see how the English is a little, not exactly standard, yeah. So, unquote. Certainly Kali Yuga was such an emergency. The house was on fire. Honest men who could understand the need would welcome Srimad Bhagavatam. even though it was now being presented, quote unquote, with so many faulty and broken linguistic technicalities. Bhaktivedanta Swami was presenting Srimad Bhagavatam unchanged, with the greatest respect for Srila Vyasadeva, and that was his cardinal virtue. He was adding his own realizations, but not in a spirit of trying to surpass the previous spiritual masters. In the all-important matter of presenting the subject strictly in parampara, Bhaktivedanta Swami suffered from no, quote unquote, faulty and broken technicalities, unquote. Yeah, means as far as the authenticity and the purity and just the transcendental completeness and perfectness of his presentation of the subject matter as such, there were no superficial imperfections at all, although his presentation with the English language had some superficial sort of technical shortcomings to some degree. He knew that without the parampara, the Bhagavatam purports would have no value. Day and night he typed at his desk beneath the small adjustable light that dangled from the ceiling on its cord. He sat on a thin mat, his back to the large pyramid that stood oddly upright within the bare room. Pages accumulated, and he kept them in place with stones. Food and sleep, although necessary, were only incidental. He was completely convinced that his Srimad Bhagavatam would create a revolution in a misdirected civilization. Thus he translated each word and gave each purport with exacting care and concentration. But it had to be done as quickly as possible. In February of 1961, on Vyasa Puja Day, the anniversary of the appearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bhaktivedanta Swami was again in Vrindavan. In honor of their spiritual master, some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples had gathered, offered flowers before his picture, and held congregational chanting in the temple. But Bhaktivedanta Swami thought that they should be doing much more than that. They should be planning and executing the worldwide preaching mission that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had desired. Instead, they were a gathering of independent individuals, each with his own small idea, each maintaining a small center or living at a center, but with no world programs, not even a program for India. Most of them had no plans or vision beyond their own bodily maintenance. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had asked for a governing body to conduct his movement, but there was no governing body, and practically there was no movement. Some who had fought bitterly were again on speaking terms and feared that any sudden organizational attempts now might simply stir up old animosities. At least they could gather together and make an offering to their spiritual master. Amongst his godbrothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami was a junior sannyasi. Although a recognized writer and editor, he had no temple or followers. Yet he knew he was trying to follow Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He saw himself helpless and alone against the vast forces of Maya. His godbrothers were not an army united against Maya's forces, but were more like apathetic monks, growing old, holding on to religious principles and rituals devoid of life? How could they gather to worship their spiritual master without distressfully admitting their failure and, in the spirit of better late than never, trying to rectify it? Since the custom on Vyasa Puja day was for each disciple to write an offering glorifying his spiritual master and to share it within the assembly of godbrothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an offering more like an explosion than a eulogy and humbly placed it before his godbrothers for their response. And this is it. I mean, this is so powerful, incredibly. Even now, my godbrothers, you return here on the order of our master, and together we engage in this puja. But simply a festival of flowers and fruits does not constitute worship. The one who serves the message of the Guru really worships him. Oh, shame, my dear brothers, aren't you embarrassed? In the manner of businessmen, you increase your disciples. Yeah, some of them were trying to do some preaching, but it wasn't really, at least in many cases, it wasn't really like straightforward Krishna-conscious preaching to really convince people and bring them to the level of transcendence. Oftentimes it was more like wheeling and dealing, and that way trying to sort of influence people to become disciples. Yeah, not like a pure presentation of Krishna consciousness. Our master said to preach, let the neophytes remain inside the temples and simply ring the bells. But just take a look at the terrible situation that has arisen. Everyone has become a sense enjoyer and has given up preaching. Wow, Haribol. From the seas, across the earth, penetrate the universal shell, come together and preach this Krishna consciousness. Then our master's service will be in proper order. Make your promise today. Give up all your politics and diplomacy. You know, those other, his godbrothers who are entangled like this, when they heard that, they must have been in shock, just complete shock. So it carries, the book continues. If the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati could join and preach together, there was every chance that they could create a spiritual revolution within the sinful world. That had been the hope of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and Bhaktivedanta Swami expressed that hope in his Vyasa Puja offering. Yeah, if they'd followed Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and worked together, this world and ISKCON and everything, it would be such a different picture. So Prabhupada's offering continues. When will that day come when a temple will be established in every house, in every corner of the world? When will the High Court judge be a Gaudiya Vaishnav with tilak beautifully decorating his forehead? When will a Vaishnav winning votes be elected president of the land and preaching be spread everywhere? Unquote. As he read the poem, its truth exploding in the midst of the gathering of aging sannyasis, some approved and some were incensed. Fried. Their meeting, however, took no new direction. They did not sit down together and plan as he had pleaded. Swami Maharaj's poem was taken as another poetic expression or as an opinion. The godbrothers were inclined to let the old wounds heal with the passing of time, to go back over the whole thing again and reconstruct the mission as it had been before, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been present, and to attempt all those ambitious programs. How was it possible? They were getting old. Some did not want to leave the shelter of Vrindavan. They would worship Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati within the holy Dham. If Bhaktivedanta Swami could do something more, let him go ahead and try. Bhaktivedanta Swami returned to Keshi Ghat thoughtful. For many years he had been unable to take a leading part in the mission because of family commitments. In 1935 in Bombay, his godbrothers had even asked him to be president of the Mutt there. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that it was not necessary that Abhay Charan join them. He would come in his own way. Now, by the grace of his spiritual master, he was ready to fulfill the meaning of sannyas. The Krishna-conscious world he had described in his poem was not a utopia, presented merely to incite his godbrothers, a dreamer's talk of the impossible. It was possible. But in any case, he had to write and print Krishna-conscious books and preach abroad. It was what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted. If his godbrothers would not do it jointly, then he would do it. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay. Amazing.
Let's check it again now.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.
Singing Krishna's name is
Rama
going up.
Rama. Huh?
I'm saying we're singing Krishna's name is going up.
Yeah. Hare Hare,